कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमम् ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणस्पत आनः शृण्वन् नोतिभिः सीदसादनम् प्रणो देवी सरस्वती वाजेभिर्वाजिनीवती धेनामवित्रयवतु गणेशाय नमः सरस्वत्यै नमः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम् ॐ नमो भगवते रुद्राय ॐ नमस्ते रुद्रमन्यव उतोत इषवे नमः नमस्ते अस्तु धन्वने बाहुभ्यामुत ते नमः यात इषुः शिवतमा शिवं बभूव ते धनुः शिवा शरव्या तव तया नो रुद्रमृडया या ते रुद्र शिवा तनूरघोरा पापकाशिनी तयानस्तनुभाषन्तमया गिरिशन्तापि चाकशी यामिषुं गिरिशन्तहस्ते बिभर्ष्यस्तवे शिवां गिरित्रतां कुरु माहि गुंसि पुरुषं जगत् शिवेन वचसा त्वा गिरिशाच्छावदामसि यथा नः सर्वमिज्जगद यक्ष्मगुं सुमना असत् अध्यवोचदधिवक्ता प्रथमो दैव्योऽभिषक् अहेगश्च सर्वान् जम्भयन् सर्वाश्च यातु धान्यः असौ यस्ताम्रो अरुण उत बभ्रुः सुमङ्गलः ये चेमागुं रुद्रा अभितो दिक्षश्रुता सहस्रशो वैशागुं हेड ईमहे असव्यो वसर्पति नीलग्रीवो विलोहितः उतैनं गोपा अरुषन्नदृशन्नुदहार्यः उतैनं विश्वा भूतानि सदृष्टो मृडयातिनः नमो अस्तु नीलग्रीवाय सहस्राक्षाय मीडुषे अथो ये अस्य सत्त्वानोऽहं तेभ्यो करन्नमः प्रमुञ्च धन्वनस्त्वमुपयोरार्तियोज्याम् याश्च देहस्त इषवः पराता भगवो वपा अवतत्यधनुस्त्वगुं सहस्राक्षशतेषु दे निशीर्य शल्यानामुका शिवो नः सुमना भव विज्यं धनुः कपर्दिनो विशल्यो बाणवागुम् उता अनेशन्नस्येषव आभुरस्य निषङ्गतिः याते हेतिर्मीडुष्टमहस्ते बभूव ते धनुः तयास्मान् विश्वतस्त्वमयक्ष्मया परिभुजा नमस्ते अस्त्वायुधाय नातताय धृष्णवे उभाभ्यामुत ते नमो बाहुभ्यां तव धन्वने परिते धन्वनो हेतिरस्मान् वृणक्तो विश्वतः अथो य इषुदिस्तवारे अस्मन्निदेहितम् नमस्ते अस्तु भगवन् विश्वेश्वराय महादेवाय त्र्यम्बकाय त्रिपुरान्तकाय त्रिकाग्निकालाय कालाग्निरुद्राय नीलकण्ठाय मृत्युञ्जयाय सर्वेश्वराय सदाशिवाय श्रीमन्महादेवाय नमः नमो हिरण्यवाहवे सेनान्ये दिशां च पतये नमो नमो वृक्षेभ्यो हरिकेशेभ्यः पशूनां पतये नमो नमः सस्मिञ्जराय त्विषीमते पतीनां पतये नमो नमो बब्लुषाय विव्याधिने नानां पतये नमो नमो हरिकेशायोपवीतिने पुष्टानां पतये नमो नमो भवस्य हेत्यै जगतां पतये नमो नमो रुद्राय तताविने क्षेत्राणां पतये नमो नमः सूताय हन्त्याय वनानां पतये नमो नमो रोहिताय स्तपतये वृक्षाणां पतये नमो नमो मन्त्रिणे वाणिजाय कक्षाणां पतये नमो नमो भुवन्तये वारिवस्कृताय औषधीनां पतये नमो नमः उच्चैर्घोषाय क्रन्दयते पत्नीनां पतये नमो नमः कृत्सविताय धावते सत्त्वनां पतये नमः नमः सहमानाय निव्याधिन आव्याधिनीनां पतये नमो नमः ककुबाय निषङ्गिणे सेनानां पतये नमो नमो निषङ्गिण इषुधिमते तस्कराणां पतये नमो नमो वञ्चते परिवञ्चते सायूनां पतये नमो नमो निचेरवे परिचरायारण्यानां पतये नमो नमः श्रिकावेभ्यो जिगागुंसद्भ्यो मुष्णताम् पतये नमो नमो शिवद्भ्यो नक्तं चरद्भ्यः प्रकृन्तानां पतये नमो नमः उष्णीषिणे गिरिचराय कुलुञ्चानां पतये नमो नमः इषुमद्भ्यो धन्वावेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः आतन्वानेभ्यः प्रतिदधानेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः आयच्छद्भ्यो विसृजभ्यश्च वो नमो नमोऽस्यद्भ्यो विद्यभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः आसीनेभ्यः शयानेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः स्वपद्भ्यो जाग्रभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः तिष्ठद्भ्यो दावभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः सभापतिभ्यश्च वो नमो नमो अश्वेभ्योऽश्वपतिभ्यश्च वो नमः नमः आव्याधिनेभ्यो विविद्धन्तेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः उगणाभ्यस्त्रिगुं हरेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमो गृत्सेभ्यो गृत्सपतिभ्यश्च वो नमो नमो व्रातेभ्यो व्रातपतिभ्यश्च वो नमो नमो गणेभ्यो गणपतिभ्यश्च वो नमो नमो विरूपेभ्यो विश्वरूपेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमो महद्भ्यः शुल्लकेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमो रतेभ्यो रतेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमो रतेभ्यो रतपतिभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः सेनाभ्यः सेनानिभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः शत्रुभ्यः संग्रहेतृभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः रक्षद्भ्यो रथकारेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः कुलालेभ्यः कर्मारेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः पुञ्जिष्टेभ्यो निषादेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः इषुकृद्भ्यो धन्वकृद्भ्यश्च वो नमो नमो मृगयोभ्यश्वनेभ्यश्च वो नमो नमः श्वभ्यश्वपतिभ्यश्च वो नमः नमो भवाय च रुद्राय च नमः शर्वाय च पशुपतये च नमो नीलग्रीवाय च शितिकण्ठाय च नमः कपर्दिने च व्युक्तकेशाय च नमः सहस्राक्षाय च शतधन्वने च नमो गिरिशाय च शिबिविष्टाय च नमो मीडुष्टमाय चेषुमते च नमो रस्वाय च वामनाय च नमो बृहते च वर्षीयसे च नमो वृद्धाय च संवृद्ध्वने च नमो अग्र्याय च प्रथमाय च नमः आशवे चाजिराय च नमः शीघ्रियाय च शीव्याय च नमः ओन्याय च वस्वन्याय च नमः श्रोतस्याय च द्वेप्याय च नमो ज्येष्ठाय च कनिष्ठाय च नमः पूर्वजाय च परजाय च नमो मध्यमाय च पगल्भाय च नमो जगन्याय च बुद्धियाय च नमः सोऽभ्याय च प्रतिसर्याय च नमो याम्याय च क्षेम्याय च नमः उर्वर्याय च खल्याय च नमः श्लोक्याय च वसान्याय च नमो वन्याय च कक्ष्याय च नमः श्रवाय च प्रतिश्रवाय च नमः आशुषेराय चाशुरताय च नमः शूराय च बबिन्दते च नमो वर्मिणे च वरोतिने च नमो बिल्मिने च कवचिने च नमः श्रुताय च श्रुतसेनाय च नमो दुन्दुभ्याय च हनन्याय च नमो दृष्णवे च प्रमुषाय च नमो दूताय च प्रहिताय च नमो निषङ्गिणे चेषु धिमते च नमः तीक्ष्णे शवे चायुधिने च नमः स्वायुधाय च सुधन्वने च नमः श्रुत्याय च पत्याय च नमः काट्याय च नीप्याय च नमः सोद्याय च सरस्याय च नमो नाद्याय च वैशन्दाय च नमः कोप्याय च वट्याय च नमो वश्याय च वश्याय च नमो मेघ्याय च विद्युत्याय च नमः ईद्रियाय च तप्याय च नमो वात्याय च रेश्म्याय च नमो वास्तव्याय च वास्तुपाय च ॐ हर 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 ॐ नमः सोमाय च रुद्राय च नमः ताम्राय च रुणाय च नमः शङ्गाय च पशुपतये च नमः उग्राय च भीमाय च नमो अग्रे वधाय च दूरे वधाय च नमो हन्त्रे च हनीयसे च नमो वृक्षेभ्यो हरिकेशेभ्यो नमस्ताराय नमः शम्भवे च मयो भवे च नमः शङ्कराय च मयस्कराय च नमः शिवाय च शिवतराय च नमः तीर्थ्याय च कोल्याय च नमः पार्याय च वार्याय च नमः प्रतरणाय चोत्तरणाय च नमः आतार्याय च लाद्याय च नमः षष्प्याय च फेन्याय च नमः सिकत्याय च प्रवाह्याय च नमः इदिन्याय च प्रपत्याय च नमः किगुंशिलाय च क्षयणाय च नमः कपर्दिने च पुलस्तये च नमो गोष्ठ्याय च गृह्याय च नमः स्तल्प्याय च गेह्याय च नमः काट्याय च गह्वरेष्ठाय च नमो हृदयाय च निवेश्याय च नमः पागुंसव्याय च रजस्याय च नमः शुष्ट्याय च हरित्याय च नमो लोप्याय चोलप्याय च नमः ऊर्ण्याय च सोर्ण्याय च नमः पर्ण्याय च पर्णशद्याय च नमो पगुरमाणाय च विघ्नते च नमः आख्यदते च प्रख्यदते च नमो वक्किरिकेभ्यो देवानागुं हृदयेभ्यो नमो विक्षीणकेभ्यो नमो विचिन्वत्केभ्यो नमः आनिर्हतेभ्यो नमः आमीवत्केभ्यः द्रापे अन्धसस्पते दरिद्रन्नीललोहिता येषां पुरुषाणाम् येषां पशूनां मा भेन्मा रोमो येषां किञ्चनाममत या ते रुद्र शिवा तनो शिवा विश्वाः भेषजे शिवा रुद्रस्य भेषजे तया नो मृडजीवसे इमागुं रुद्राय तवसे कपर्दिने क्षयद्वीराय प्रवरावहे मतिम् यथा नः शमसद्विपदे चतुष्पदे विश्वं पुष्टं ग्रामे अस्मिन्ननातुरम् मृडानो रुद्रो तनो मयस्कृते क्षयद्वीराय नमसा विधेमते यच्छं च योश्च मनुरायजे पिता तदश्याम तव रुद्र प्रणीतौ मानो महान्तमुतमानो अर्भकम् मान उक्षन्तमुतमान उक्षितम् मानो वदे पितरम् मोद मातरम् प्रियामानस्तनुवो रुद्रनीरिषः मानस्तोकेतन ये मान आयुषि मानो गोषु मानो अश्वेषु रीरिषः वीरान्मानो रुद्रभावितो वदेर्हविष्वन्तो नमसा विदेवते आराते गोग्न उत पूरुषग्ने क्षयद्वीराय सुम्नमस्मेते अस्तु रक्षा च नो अधि च देव ब्रूह्यदाचन शर्म यच्छद्विपर्हाः सुहिश्रुतम् गर्त सदंयुगानम् मृगन्न भीममुपहत्नुमुग्रम् मृडाचरित्रे रुद्रस्तवानो अन्यन्ते अस्मन्निव पन्तु सेनाः परिणो रुद्रस्य हेतिर्वृणक्तु परित्वेषस्य दुर्मतिरघायो अवस्तिरामगवद्भ्यस्तनुष्वमीडुस्तोकाय मृडया मीडुष्टमशिवतमशिवो नः सुमना भव परमे वृक्ष आयुधन्निदाय कृत्तिम् वसान आचर पिनाकम् बिभ्रदागहि विगिरित विलोहित नमस्ते अस्तु भगवः यास्ते सहस्रगुम् हेतयोन्यमस्मन्निव पन्तुताः सहस्राणि सहस्रदा बाहुवोस्तव हेतयः तासामीशानो भगवः पराचीनामुकाकृते सहस्राणि सहस्रशो ये रुद्रा अधिभूम्या तेषागुम् सहस्रयोजने वधन्वानि तन्मसि अस्मिन् महत्यर्णवेऽन्तरिक्षे भवादि नीलग्रीवाशितिकण्ठा शर्वा अधः क्षमाचराः नीलग्रीवाशितिकण्ठादिवगुम् रुद्रा उपश्रुताः ये वृक्षेषु तस्मिंजरा नीलग्रीवा विलोहिताः ये भूतानामधिपतयो विशिखासक्कपर्दिनः ये अन्येषु विविद्यन्ति पात्रेषु विपतो जनान् ये पदाम् पतिरक्षय ऐलभृताय व्युदः ये तीर्थानि प्रचरन्ति श्रिकावन्तो निषङ्गिणः य एतावन्तश्च भूयागुंसश्च दिशो रुद्रावितस्थिरे तेषागुंसहस्रयोजने वधन्वानि तन्मसि नमो रुद्रेभ्यो ये पृथिव्याम् येऽन्तरिक्षे ये दिवि येषामन्नम् वातो वर्षमिषवस्तेभ्यो दश प्राचीर्दश दक्षिणा दश प्रतीचीर्दशोदीचीर्दशोद्वास्तेभ्यो नमस्ते नो मृडयन्तु तेऽयम् विश्वो यश्च नो द्वेष्टितम् भोजम्बे ददामि त्र्यम्बकं यजामहे सुगन्धिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनान् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयवामृतात् यो रुद्रो अग्नव्यो अप्सु य ओषधीषु यो रुद्रो विश्वा भुवना विवेश तस्मै रुद्राय नमो अस्तु ये ते सहस्रवयुतं पाशा मृत्योर्मर्त्याय हन्तवे तान् यज्ञस्य मायया सर्वान् वयजामहे मृत्यवे स्वाहा मृत्यवे स्वाहा प्राणानां ग्रन्थिरसि रुद्रो मा विशान्तकः तेनान्नेनाप्यायस्व नमो रुद्राय विष्णवे मृत्युर्मे पाहि तमस्तु हि अस्वशस्वदन्वायो विश्वस्य क्षयति मे सजस्य यक्ष्वा महेशौ मनसाय रुद्रं नमो भिर्देवमसुरं दुवस्य अयं मे हस्तो भगवान् अयं मे भगवत्तरः अयं मे विश्वभेषजो यगुं शिवाभिवर्षणः ॐ शान्ति शान्तिः। स्वस्ति प्रजाभ्यः परिपालयन्ताम् न्यायेन मार्गेण महिषाः। गोब्राह्मणेभ्यः शुभमस्तु नित्यम्। समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु। समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु। समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం భూర్భువస్సువః తత్సవితుర్వరేణ్యం భర్గో దేవస్య ధీమహి ధియో యో నః ప్రచోదయాత్. ఓం तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यम् भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यम् भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यम् भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यम् भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि
Dr. Shamanan is a GP partner. Dr. Shamanan is a GP in South East London. GP in South East London. GP in interest in medical education. GP in interest in medical education. 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 Perform in the divine presence of our beloved Bhagwan as part of the Sai Mahima pilgrimages. Sister Nirali is a senior PCN pharmacist for Wellingborough and East Northants. She trained at University Hospitals of Leicester and Kettering General Hospital, becoming a senior cardiology specialist pharmacist. Her key areas being acute coronary syndrome, heart failure, and anticoagulation management. She is also an independent prescriber. She is currently one clinical pharmacist assisting in the COVID vaccine rollout in her area. She is also the Region 4 Healthcare Lead and Joint National Youth Adult Coordinator for the SSIO UK. I now hand over to Dr. Shramanan and Sister Nirali. Jai Sai Ram.
My humble pranams at the lotus feet of our beloved Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai Baba. Sai elders, uncles, aunties, brothers and sisters, Jai Sai Ram to you all. It is my pleasure and privilege to be able to speak to you today with the support of Sister Nirali about the ongoing coronavirus vaccination program, which is being rolled out in your local communities across the country and the world beyond. The biggest vaccination program of its kind in human history. I sometimes find myself describing what we are going through with this pandemic as the equivalent of a medical world war. When I sit and reflect on this statement, I realize that unfortunately, I am not exaggerating. This is a fight that is being fought in every country across the world to defend and protect ourselves and our loved ones from this invisible disease. During what has felt like a very helpless time, filled with anxiety and fear, with suffering and death, the landscape is changing. The things that we are able to do to help ourselves and our communities is now growing. This evening's talk is one about hope in a situation where there is still many uncertainties. It is critically important that in such situations that we put our maximum energy into the things that we have control over. In terms of the agenda, we are going to cover some of the basics surrounding this virus that has dominated our lives over the last year. To answer the question, should you have the vaccine? To address concerns regarding safety and side effects, which of the vaccines are available to you right now, and what you should do next. Over the last 1 year, we have all become armchair virologists and epidemiologists as we have observed this new coronavirus infection, which causes a respiratory illness that originated in Wuhan, China, and spread through the world over the course of 2020. To date, we know that over 109 million cases have been identified worldwide, with over 2.4 million deaths attributed to this disease. If we ask the question, have we seen anything like this coronavirus respiratory illness before? The answer is yes. It can be responsible for something as simple as the common cold, but other strains of coronavirus were responsible for the more serious outbreaks of SARS in 2003, which was responsible for 8,000 cases and 774 deaths, and MERS, known to have caused about 858 deaths. These are spread through aerosol particles from an infected person. So let us get to the core of this evening's talk. Should you have the coronavirus vaccine? The short answer is yes, you should. The pathway out of this pandemic lay in ensuring that we are able to protect ourselves by cutting the infection's ability to jump from person to person. You know that this virus thrives on our human nature to want to live in communities and have social contact. Social distancing and isolation are cruel terms that we have unfortunately become familiar with in order to stop the disease from spreading. The real fire breaks come when we are able to stop serious infections and transmissions. And this is at the core of principles of any vaccination program. Already, over 15 million vaccinations have been delivered in this country alone. And yet, there are very concerning trends to suggest that patients from Black and minority ethnic groups, including South Asians, are more likely to decline a vaccine or to have a degree of vaccine hesitancy. There is also a greater refusal rate in patients from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. These are described as health inequalities, and it is the responsibility of every single healthcare professional to fight such inequalities. One of the very concerning reasons for vaccine hesitancy is fake news. Stories with no factual basis being spread, looking to delegitimize and take confidence away from what are very important and logical actions to protect your own health. Yes, there is fear of the pandemic, but there is also a pandemic of fear. These false stories in themselves are spreading like a virus, infecting the minds of the more isolated and fragile within the community with fear and exposing them to risks that they should not be taking. To fight this fear, you need to ask questions and gain knowledge from reliable and trusted sources. This is not only to help yourself, but to help your family, friends, and community. One of the questions I get regularly asked is the vaccine safe? Every medical device, treatment, and therapy is rigorously scrutinized and monitored for safety. This is done by the Medicines and Health Products Regulatory Agency, also known as the MHRA. The vaccines are safe and they are effective. I will now hand over to Sister Nurali to give you some more information about the development and trials process.
Thank you, Dr. Shavanan. So if we have a look at how these vaccines work and how do these trials work, we can see that the development of the vaccines has actually happened due to the research that has happened with the previous viruses that we have, such as SARS and MERS. So using that information and that research means that we're able to create these vaccines at a much rapid rate. So how do these trials work? So we have phase 1 of a trial, which looks at the safety of the medication. So you're looking at about 20 to 100 healthy participants. And this is just to understand the safety of a medicine. Now, bear in mind, every single medication that is produced goes through exactly the same process that this vaccine has as well. So on to phase 2. Once we've established the safety, we look at what are the effective doses and what are the side effects. And we do that when we do versus a placebo as well. So what that means is you have the drug versus a dummy drug, okay? And that's tested in approximately hundreds of people. And that's, again, just to see how effective and how safe it is as well, and what are the side effects. Then we move on to phase 3, when we look at thousands of patients across the world and for a prolonged period of time. So again, this is looking at the side effects, the efficacy of the medication, as well as what the effects are versus a dummy medication, or the best treatment at that particular time for that particular condition. Once they pass all those 3 phases, then we move on to phase 4, which is looking at regulatory approval. So this is what we term the MHRA approval. And this is when the medication then moves into the general population, but it is still monitored through something called the yellow card system. So every brand new drug, brand new vaccine, everything like that, the side effects, if you experience any, can actually be reported through the yellow card system. And any healthcare professional or any member of the public can report these. So the current vaccines have got temporary regulatory approval, and this is allowed under the emergency situations, such as the global pandemic. So what do vaccines actually do? We have a lot of talk about these vaccines. We've had them since we were babies as well. But what do they actually do, and what are the different types of vaccines that we actually have? So there are many different types, from live attenuated vaccines to dead vaccines, to those which use genetic material. So there are many, many different kinds of vaccines that you get. And these vaccines are using genetic material. Now, that doesn't mean that the genetic material alters your DNA in any way, but what it means is that it allows the body to replicate those proteins so that it can recognize the virus if it does enter your body. And what that means is that the body is ever ready to combat it with its soldiers in case the virus ever comes into contact with your body cells. So this means that actually your body is able to develop the defense mechanism a lot faster and causing less severity of illness. So this is a very good response that we get. So the question that we get asked a lot, well, which is the best vaccine? Should we go when we have the Pfizer vaccine, which you can see here, or when we have the AstraZeneca vaccine, or commonly known as the Oxford vaccine? So Between these, there is no best vaccine. Both will protect you. So we predominantly have these two vaccines in circulation at the moment, and they both provide immunity to the coronavirus. So Pfizer uses mRNA, which is the genetic material. And the trials were conducted in 6 countries and included 44,000 participants. AstraZeneca also uses the genetic material, but that's enclosed in a viral vector that is used to deliver the vaccine into the body. And the trial here had 24,000 patients. And they do not contain any animal products. And again, nor can it alter your DNA as well. And that's a question that I get that I get asked quite a lot. It also doesn't contain any of the coronavirus itself. So it can't give you coronavirus as well. So when we move on to talking about each of the vaccines which are currently in circulation. So with the Pfizer vaccine, you will have heard that you have to store them at -70 degrees in a freezer. Now, this is quite common for hospital sites to receive. If you're at a GP surgery or a mass vaccination center, then they will already come thawed. And they have to be stored in the fridge at 2 to 8 degrees for up to 5 days. So they have to be used up quickly, which means that when you do get an appointment for it, it's really great if you turn up for it, because otherwise we have to find spare people to then have the dose as well, because no doses are allowed to go to waste. So with the Pfizer vaccine, the genetic material is actually enveloped in 4 layers of lipid. So therefore it has to be handled with care. It can't be shaken or stirred. So once the Pfizer vaccine is made up, it has to be used within 6 hours. Otherwise, it has to be discarded, because what happens is that those lipid layers can then disintegrate. The dose is 0.3 mils, and it is given in the muscle of your upper arm. So, and what's happening at the moment is that whilst Pfizer are actually ramping up production, there is limited supply currently, but there is enough supply for the future for the second doses. You do have to wait 15 minutes after you have received this dose. That's because there were some reports of people having anaphylactic reactions. So by law, you have to actually stay within the building for 15 minutes after you've received this dose. This is just in case anybody faints or they have an allergic reaction or anything like that. So after you've had the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine, it has 95% efficacy. The second dose would be administered after 12 weeks, but the allergy status of yourself is very important to determine whether you can receive this vaccine. And we'll go over those allergy statuses a little bit later on as well. When we're looking at the AstraZeneca vaccine, this one also is stored from 2 to 8 degrees in the fridge, and it can be stored for up to 6 months. And it doesn't need to be made up, so it's drawing it straight out of the vial and then administering it to the patient. It has to be used within 6 hours once the vial has been punctured, and the dose is 0.5 mils. Again, it's given in the muscle of the upper arm. But for this one, there's no need to wait for 15 minutes within the building. But what you would have to do is wait 15 minutes in the car before you start driving. That's just in case you feel any kind of lightheadedness or dizziness or anything that might cause any kind of danger when you are driving. So you should stay in your car for 15 minutes before driving. And for this one, the only allergy status there is that you have to make sure you're not allergic to any of the ingredients that are contained in the vaccine. And when you go to the vaccine center, they would ask you these questions about the allergies, and they would have a list of those ingredients for the vaccine available so that they can cross-check as well. So with this one, there is 73.43 efficacy after the second dose. The second dose is after 12 weeks again. And this one is the better one to have if you have multiple allergies, and you have to carry adrenaline for that as well. So for those allergy statuses, the AstraZeneca vaccine would be best. And it's just it's probably just good to note here that that no vaccine is ever 100%. So these are actually good efficacy rates to protect you. And what we mean by that is what I described before, is that whilst you may have the vaccine, that doesn't mean that you still can't get coronavirus. But what it does mean is that if you do get coronavirus, then those symptoms that you get and the severity of the illness will be less. And it has shown now, there's more emerging data to show that it actually is reducing hospital admissions as well. So back over to Dr. Shravanand to have a chat about the allergy status.
Thank you. I mean, one point that I would add when you're talking about efficacy, if you try and compare it against sort of other vaccinations that we are already sort of more familiar with. So if you think about something like the annual seasonal influenza vaccine, for example, that has a sort of efficacy rate ranging from sort of 50 to 60%. Or if you think about something like the BCG vaccination, which is there to try and protect against tuberculosis, I would say that that also has an efficacy rate ranging from sort of 50 to 60%. But it's still extremely effective at being able to prevent TB infections and therefore prevent transmission of TB infections as well. Certainly, if I were to compare these vaccines, I sometimes actually call a BCG a much more sort of angry vaccination. I know that I've got a BCG scar on my left upper arm, and I know that my two children have actually got the same scars on their arms from when they were vaccinated as babies as well. Comparatively speaking, I would call these vaccines far more tame, far more calmer in their way, compared to something like a BCG vaccine, which actually most of us have probably had, and most of us are quite keen and happy for our sort of children and babies to have those. So, I mean, just a word about talking about allergy statuses. You know, I'll reiterate what Sister Nurali has said, saying that, you know, both of these vaccines are quite stable, quite safe. And as a safety precaution, you know, patients who have had the Pfizer vaccine, they are being monitored for about 15 minutes on the vaccination site before being allowed to leave. Really, it's a question of saying that any patient who has a history of serious allergic reactions, anaphylaxis, who carry around an adrenaline pen or an EpiPen, these patients should really be considered for the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. In terms of side effects, by far and away the most common sort of side effects is you know, having a sore arm, feeling tired. Less commonly, you know, some patients are having things like headaches, mild fever, chills, but usually these are short-lived, only for a few days. And certainly the benefits of protection from hospitalizations, preventing complications from serious disease, and preventing deaths far outweigh any risks associated with vaccination. I will ask Sister Nurali just to say a few words about the other potential vaccines that are on the horizon for deployment.
Thank you, Dr. Shravanand. So there are some more vaccines which are going to be coming out as well. So we've got the Moderna vaccine, which has got regulatory approval now. So we're just waiting for that to be shipped over and have the guidance actually set out. So that's another vaccine to add to our arsenal. This is also used with the mRNA. Like the Pfizer is using the mRNA as well, so it bears some similarities to that. So watch this space for the Moderna vaccine as well. So they have been ordered. We also have the Novavax vaccine, which is currently in stage 3 trials, and they've shown an 89% efficacy as well. So that's coming in the pipeline too. And then finally, we've got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is probably the latest one that we've heard about. And the good thing is that this one can be stored at room temperature, which is great. It has 66% efficacy at preventing symptomatic cases, and they haven't shown any kinds of hospitalizations or death. So those are all positive things coming our way as well. So now, what happens next? What happens next is it's entirely up to you. The choice is yours. So we've been able to provide you with some information about the vaccines, and we understand that there are concerns about receiving the vaccines as well. But what we hope is that with the information that has been provided, that you'll be able to make an informed decision and be able to decide whether you want the vaccine, whether you don't want the vaccine, or whether you've got more questions, which are even more welcome. It's always best to be informed so that you know you're making the right choice for yourself, your family, your community, and do that research as well. So what happens now is you probably may have already received a text message or letters from the NHS or from your GP surgeries. Now, what's happening here is that clusters of GP surgeries are coming together and they'll be vaccinating from one site. So this is called the vaccination hub. There are also mass vaccination sites at larger centres which are inviting patients to come and have their coronavirus vaccine as well. So make sure that all your details are up to date with your GP surgery. If they don't have a mobile number or a home line or even an email address, then you won't be contacted as easily as they could. If you don't have a mobile phone, then some GP surgeries are asking for the contact details of sons, daughters, or anybody who else has a mobile phone number for which they can send the text message to book your vaccine in. And if you're unsure whether you are due to have the vaccine now, then you can call your GP surgery or your practice pharmacist, and they'll be able to tell you what cohort you're in, so that you can book your vaccine in as well. Unfortunately, you don't have a choice which vaccine you receive unless there's a reason why you can't have the Pfizer vaccine. For anybody who has had their first dose of vaccine and they had a reaction to it, then it's likely that what will happen is that you'll be invited to go to the hospital to receive your second dose, so that you can be observed for a longer period of time as well. And that's some of the things which are happening around the country as well. So back over to Dr. Shovanan to have a bit of chat about the cohorts.
Thank you. So this may be a list that you may have seen and may be already familiar with, and this is the priority risk groups for the order of coronavirus vaccinations. What I would say is that it's split into two phases, and this is phase one, and these are the 9 groups. Essentially, the plan is to get all patients who are aged 50 and above, or those with complicated medical background conditions vaccinated by the end of April. The further target is to get all adults, so all of those people who are 18 plus vaccinated by the autumn time, and that's really that's the sort of targets after that. I know that at the moment we have gone through our group 1, 2, 3, 4 patients. So these are patients who are 70 years and above, and patients who have been shielding as well are included within that group 4 category. And we've started working on our group 5 patients in our local area. What I would say is that, I would reiterate the point that when you get invited, please do make sure that you take the appointment and you take the earliest available. As we've already said, when we get delivery of something like the Pfizer vaccine, the clock starts ticking. The 5-day clock starts ticking. We need to make sure that every single dose is used in the correct way, and none of it is wasted. So when you have been vaccinated, I'd advise, make sure that you're resting well, that you're staying well hydrated. There's absolutely no harm, and maybe it's a good idea to take some paracetamol as well. My advice would be is that you keep safe, and you come back and make sure you come back for your second vaccine 12 weeks later. The plan essentially is that you will be invited in a very similar way that you were invited for your first vaccine. And really, my request would be is that you sit and speak with your friends, with your family, and your communities about your vaccination experience, and really be quite honest about it. Be honest about the booking process. Be honest about how things were when you got to the centre, and if you experienced any side effects as well, be honest about that as well. To be very honest with you, I've had the privilege of working in my local vaccination hub, and I have to say that it was an extremely positive experience getting vaccinated, as well as working in the hubs myself. So, if I ask the question, Sister Nurali, have you been vaccinated?
Yes, I have been vaccinated. Have you been vaccinated?
I've certainly been vaccinated. You can probably see my badge that I wear everywhere now. I have to say, I feel very honoured, privileged, and lucky that as a healthcare professional, I was prioritised for vaccination. I had my Pfizer vaccine on the 11th of January, which is about 6 weeks ago now. I'm very grateful that I have this protection for myself, for my team, for my patients that I see face to face, for my family at home, and my broader community. I'm really happy to state that the whole of my practice team, from reception to management, from nursing to all of the clinical staff, have all been vaccinated. I will be honest when I say that we had a few members of staff who were vaccine hesitant, but through regular reminders and constant encouragement, they all got the confidence to be vaccinated. And I cannot tell you the peace of mind that it gives me as a GP partner and employer, knowing that they have all been vaccinated. For my Sai family watching this, my advice to you is clear, that when you are invited, please be vaccinated. If you feel it is safe for you to volunteer at a vaccination hub, then please do so. There is a need, and we are all very well placed to shower every single patient who attends these vaccinations hubs with Bhagavan's gentle touch and love. It is a wonderfully positive experience seeing so many of our community's most elderly, frail, and fragile coming out to be vaccinated and protected. It is a powerfully empowering feeling of taking back control of our lives in the fight against this disease. If you think you are not safe to volunteer, then that's okay. You also have important work to do. Stay at home and stay safe. Come back in 12 weeks for your next vaccination. But in the meantime, spread the positive message to your family, friends, and community that you have been vaccinated, and tell them your experiences.
Thank you, Dr. Shavanan. So let's all do our bit. Let's stay home. Let's protect each other, protect the NHS, and save lives. If you do choose to go for your vaccination, then please be patient and be kind to the healthcare professionals. We are working tirelessly for the public safety, and queues and waiting times cannot be helped sometimes. We do try our very, very hardest to try to figure out how to keep the queues down and keep the car parking going and everything like that. And also, please bear with us when there are queries, because the rules and the laws are constantly changing whilst we are working as well. So please make sure that if you do go for your vaccination, that you do dress warmly, wear your coat, scarf, gloves, hat, everything, and stay warm. and stay safe. Thank you all very much for listening to this webinar, and we'd like to open the floor up to any questions, additional questions that you may have. And we hope that this has been informative and that it has helped you to think about whether you would like to have the vaccination. Sairam.
Really excellent content on a very important topic. I think just prior to asking a few questions that have cropped up, I'd just like to give a little personal experience. I've had my second dose today, and I think there's a lot of anxiety around sort of the organisation and logistics of how the vaccine's rolled out and what your experience will be at a vaccination centre. And I have to say, it's very, very well run. It's organised. It's safe. You don't feel at any one point that you're cramped or pressurized to have your vaccination. So overall, the experience on the day of having your vaccine is very positive. So I think it should reassure all of us that when we have our vaccinations, it's in a very well controlled environment. The first question that I think will roll out is probably one that is very, very at the foremost of everyone's mind at the moment, and that is if the vaccine is protective against all forms of the variant of COVID-19. Are either of you able to shed some light on that?
So I mean, I think when it comes to the variant, I think that the evidence is still being gathered as to which of the vaccines are going to be to be able to protect against them. If we think about what's happened in South Africa, one of the concerns was the South African variant, which they are facing there. They had 1 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccine, and there was a very small sort of early study to suggest that the AstraZeneca vaccine may be less sort of effective at protecting against coronavirus. I think that it's an important point to raise when we talk about efficacy. What do we actually mean? First of all, we want to make sure that a vaccine protects against deaths. Then we want to make sure that it's protecting against hospitalizations. We want it to protect against severe disease, and we want it to then protect against symptomatic mild disease, and then ultimately we also want it to protect against transmission. And really, it needs to be stated that when it comes to any of the COVID vaccines that have been authorized so far in this country, that all of these vaccines are effective against all of the variants, against the main two, which is in terms of protecting against deaths and in terms of protecting against hospitalizations as well. So, of course, the main variant which is causing issues, problems, and concerns in our own country here is the Kent variant, and certainly the vaccines that we have available, have been shown to be, very effective against the Kent variant that we have here.
Just to add to what you're saying as well, there's what the companies are also doing is making sure that the vaccines are tweaked to actually include that the variants are also covered as well. So that is an ongoing thing that the drug companies are doing as well. We do know that there is some degree of protection against those variants, but as Dr. Shavanan said, it's still emerging data.
One other question that has just popped up on the feed is, can you have the vaccine if you've had COVID?
You can have it, but you have to wait 4 weeks after you've had COVID before you can actually have the vaccination. So that'll be one of the questions that you actually get asked at the center is, have you been COVID free for a month? Have you had a COVID test? Have you ever had COVID? So those are the questions that they'll ask before you get the jab. So it's a few screening questions that they ask you before you receive the jab to make sure that it's safe for you to receive.
And on that, your treatment regime stays the same of the two vaccines, 12 weeks apart?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another question that we have is, if the virus comes again in the future, can this vaccine have a fatal reaction with that? Is there any thoughts on that?
I mean, what I would say is that there is no sort of understandable or logical sort of scientific basis for a vaccine that we're giving now to have any kind of sort of serious reaction like that. You know, in the future, there's nothing to logically say that that could happen. And I think that, you know, if we think about sort of regular vaccines that we give at the moment, you know, I say that every single year we have a seasonal influenza epidemic. We never really describe it in that sense, but this is a respiratory illness that we try and protect, you know, which causes a certain number of hospitalization and deaths every year, and a certain number of preventable, you know, hospitalizations and deaths every year. You know, all of this now sounds very, very familiar when we're talking about sort of COVID, because it is a respiratory illness, and we're trying to roll out a vaccination which is there to try and protect, trying to prevent sort of hospitalizations, you know, and deaths. So we, you know, when we are giving these flu vaccines, you know, there's nothing to suggest that you know, there's any sort of longer term sort of side effects issues or concerns. So there's nothing logical to suggest that that would be the case.
Thank you very much. Another thing that I think is in the context of a global pandemic, which we have never experienced before, and the rush to have the vaccine produced within a year, which is actually a phenomenal effort and has never been done in the context of viral illness before. It does throw into light the politics of vaccine rollout. There's recently an article in the Independent in December that has made people slightly wary of how this logistically has been rolled out by the UK government and countries in general. Essentially, the government granted pharmaceutical giants such as Pfizer legal indemnity, protecting it from being sued, enabling the virus vaccine to be rolled out, you know, extremely promptly within the UK. Is this normal practice, and do companies usually seek legal indemnity in situations like this?
So I'm quite happy to pick up this question. What I would say, I'm glad that you mentioned politics, because I was going to say that there is a political warning with this answer. I think that we need to, if we compare, one thing I will say as a frontline GP is that I'm profoundly grateful that I have vaccine in hand to be able to give to my patients. And I can only be grateful to the leadership above me for their ability to be able to secure that for me so that I can give it to my patients. If we look across the channel at what's happening in Europe at the moment, that they're simply not in the same position as we are. And they followed a very different sort of pathway in organizing contracts and organizing their sort of authorization, you know, for the vaccine. One of the things that needs to be said is that by the British government, by giving this indemnity, you know, they were able to secure contracts, and they were able to secure sort of early supply, protected supply. And that's something which is, you know, a very, very positive thing, you know, for us in this country. The second thing that I would say is that actually the number of patients who actually come to harm as a result of vaccination is actually extremely, extremely small. So the number of patients who will actually get to a point where they need to take advantage of any such indemnity scheme is also extremely small. So you could argue in terms of politics that it is a little bit of a clever and cunning move to be able to secure sort of early supply of a vaccine that's in extremely high demand, as we have seen play out over the last few weeks and months.
I think the question comes into like who therefore becomes accountable, and I think because the government has granted that indemnity, then therefore it would move to the government to have that. And we've seen that happen in the past before as well.
Just a follow-on question and comment on that topic of politics versus public health now. The question comes to mind of the initial data suggested the second dosing to be given after a period of 6 weeks, which then got pushed back to 12 weeks. This was based on not very much evidence that was available, but on the balance of public health safety. Do you encounter this question a lot in your clinical practice? And secondly, what are your thoughts on the delayed second dose rollout?
So yes, we do get this question quite a lot in clinical practice. We've seen now actually from the studies in Israel that having the dose 12 weeks apart has conferred really good immunity. So it actually has, so from the Israel study, they've had 95.8% reduction in hospitalizations by having that second dose spaced out by 12 weeks as well. So we know that the evidence again is slowly emerging that actually having the doses 12 weeks apart enables the body to kind of get used to the vaccine. And so when you have your second dose, it actually builds up your immunity further.
I mean, I think my own sort of personal opinion on this, I think that Professor Van Tam, who I think we've all sort of come to know during this, I think gave a very good example. If we've got two grandparents and we've got two vaccines in our hands, do we want to give, one grandparent sort of 90% protection or each of them sort of 70 to 80% protection? And I think that when it comes to that kind of decision making, when we then draw that out to a population, a population of patients, it feels uncomfortable to do it without evidence, but actually on the basis of sort of solid sort of theoretical basis, I think that it's reasonable, and I think it was a good idea. And I think, as Sister Nurali is saying, as we're looking at the evidence and as we're observing the vaccination rollout and things, we can see that actually it was a very sort of prudent move to try and get as many patients covered with the vaccination as possible during what is still the winter season at the moment.
Thank you for that. Moving on, could you clarify the stance following sort of comments from the CDC in the US, which essentially said that the vaccine protects the person being vaccinated only, but doesn't stop the spread of COVID-19. How true is this? And is it possible to still be a carrier of the vaccine even if you've had the vaccination yourself?
So we've seen that actually we're getting more and more transmissibility data, and it is showing that actually it is helping decrease the transmissibility of giving COVID to somebody else, as well as protecting yourself. It does mean that you are kind of protecting others. But again, this is emerging data, and we can see probably from the REACT study. The REACT study is constantly being updated, and this basically looks at transmission of COVID in the community. And it's looking at hospitalizations and it's looking at deaths, and that's constantly being updated to see what is the situation in England. And since these COVID vaccines have been rolled out, we can actually see that there is a decrease in transmissibility, decrease in hospitalizations, and decrease in severe illnesses as well. But we don't have a figure as yet what that transmissibility data is. We just know that it's going down.
Yeah, I mean, I think these were comments that were made by Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's a US top infectious diseases expert. He's a very well respected clinician. He's 80 years old and he's advised 7 US presidents in his time. And I think he was recently given a prize for defending science, for courageously defending science in the face of uninformed opposition during the challenging COVID crisis. So I've got a lot of time for what he's got to say. And I think, as Sister Nurali is saying, if you actually look at the timing of what he was saying and when he was saying it, it was actually quite some time ago. And certainly it was a question of saying that there was no evidence to suggest that it would reduce transmission. And I think that we need to look at that no evidence. No evidence does not mean that therefore the opposite is true. It's a question of saying that there is no evidence to say that it will reduce transmission, and there's no evidence to say that it won't reduce transmission. Whereas actually in theory, with nearly every other vaccination that we look at, in theory, it's a question of saying it should reduce transmission. And as Sister Nurali is saying, the ongoing observational data that we're looking at the moment is suggesting that there is a reduction in transmissibility, which is also there, which is really the one of the last things that we're looking for a vaccination to do. So it is encouraging. I think if you were to ask him again what his thoughts were on this, he would give us some more, the most up-to-date evidence which is out there at the moment.
I mean, as frontline health practitioners, I mean, how much time do you really have to sort of analyze the raw data and studies for themselves versus, documentation and evidence from regulatory bodies such as NICE and others? I mean, how informed do you feel personally as frontline medics to do your job based on the evidence that you feel is reliable and relevant versus what you're being told? How confident are you in the process?
So for me personally, I think it's one of my key jobs as a pharmacist is to kind of evaluate the evidence and critically analyze the papers, the trials that have come out, and question it as well. And I know myself and Dr. Shavanan, when we first were looking at the COVID vaccination rollout and looking at the data, we were both like, oh, what does this say? We need to wait before we advise anything. Let's see what the data says. And, we both went through all of that. It's one of the first things that we do is actually, have a look at that data, then have a look at what the government says. Does it align with what the data says? Ask those questions. And actually, I think one of the good things that the government has done has given us direct access to those people who are in the know about the rollout, about the data. So they've been really good in doing that. So if we do have any questions, oh, what about this? What about that? We've been able to ask those experts directly, and they've been able to respond to us directly as well. We're truly grateful for that. So, there's always lots of time for it. And we do work overtime because we recognize that this is a global health issue, and we recognize that it is our duty to make sure that even the actions that we take are for the benefit of the public, and that requires us to look at that evidence, look very deeply into it, to make sure that we're always taking that right course of action.
One brief point that I would make in this regard is that certainly as a general practitioner, I think that we're, generalism is our specialism, and we're sort of expected to know something about everything, and it's just not, it's simply not possible for me to have the answer to every question that is posed to me. And I think it's about making sure that I sort of have access to sort of groups of specialist opinion, as well as sort of regular sort of free access to, sort of reliable sources of information. I think especially when I think back to sort of shielding, who should be shielding, who shouldn't be shielding. We really had to drill down. There was general guidelines, and then there were specific, Royal Colleges and speciality organizations like the British Society of Gastroenterologists, who would really sort of drill down. When they're releasing statements, I know that there are reliable statements that I can rely on, because actually, a panel of specialists has actually sat down, analyzed the data specifically, and then really condensed it into a usable form for us, really on the front line. And even pre-pandemic, this is what we do. This is naturally what we do. We look we're very fortunate in this country that we have a network of sort of reliable speciality organizations, as well as sort of organizations like the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, NICE, whose simple job is to analyze all of the evidence and to really critically drill it down into a usable form that we are able to reliably pick up and use. I'll give a brief example. I think that I wanted to look through all of the guidelines relating to diabetes, and I think that the total document ran 700 pages, whereas the guideline itself, was in a much more condensed sort of few pages that I'm able to sort of pick up and use. And I guess if I needed to really drill down on one question, I can go into that 700-page document and look for the specific papers that they've referred to be able to answer sort of my own professional curiosity to analyze what they've looked at. But you know, we are fortunate in that way that we have dedicated organization and panels to be able to condense that information for us.
And they also update all the time. So one of the guidance that we predominantly use is the Green Guide. So the Green Guide, which is accessible on the government website, that's continually updated for any new guidance that comes out, you know, from the immunization committees and that sort of thing. And they've been in a timely manner, which is incredible work, actually, to be able to disseminate up-to-date information in time for vaccinations. And we're talking about, you know, the next day, the morning of, and it's an incredible work that's been going on to give us the guidance on the ground of how we need to operate.
Thank you for that. That's really important and useful for us to know. Just coming on to the last couple of questions. From the patient perspective, can the vaccine react with any medications that as a patient I may be taking?
So it doesn't interact with any medications, but what you do have to be wary of is if you are on any blood thinning medication, such as warfarin, apixaban, rivaroxaban, those sorts of things, then once you get your jab, you may or may not just bleed a little bit longer, like you would with any jab that you receive, whether it's the flu jab or anything like that, because the method of delivery is exactly the same. It's not that it interacts, it's just that the jab may kind of cause that kind of injury, if you like, to the arm, which may cause it to bleed a little bit. If you do have any kind of underlying illnesses, such as if you're undergoing chemotherapy or you're having rheumatology injections or anything like that, then normally what happens is that your consultant will advise when you should have your COVID vaccination. So some are recommending 2 weeks before, some are recommending 4 weeks, some are saying they need to have it sooner rather than later. So those are kind of individual cases for which that you would have to go to your consultant, and they would advise as to when you should have it, how soon before you should have it, your chemotherapy or your injection, and so on and so forth.
The other question from a patient perspective is, you very helpfully have spoken about the different types of vaccines, but if this vaccine works differently to other vaccines, as you've claimed, why are people experiencing COVID-like symptoms for a day or two after they've had their vaccine? Could you explain to us?
So what I would say, I mean, if we go back to, you know, what we're looking for a vaccine to do, you know, we are looking for it to challenge the immune system, you know, to come up with a response, to come up with a, you know, a defense against, you know, what we're looking to vaccinate against. And I think in terms of the side effects that we spoke about earlier, I mean, I certainly had a sore arm and I was certainly tired. I certainly found that my son kept on running into my arm regularly, you know, during the few days after I had my vaccination as well. But it's one of these things. I think that, you know, you can get things like headaches, you can get things like a low-grade fever, and you can get things like chills, but they, you know, they usually are short-lived. They last a few days, you know, and then they wear off. Certainly one question that I've got asked is that, you know, if you develop a low-grade fever, you know, fever being one of the COVID symptoms, should you therefore go and get a COVID test? And I think it's what I would say the stress is on low-grade fever. So if it's a low-grade fever, we can safely assume that it's a vaccine reaction and the vaccine doing what we want it to do. But if it is, if it is a high-grade fever, then certainly it's worth sort of calling 119 and having a chat with the NHS system to see whether a COVID sort of test, a formal test, would be suitable in that situation.
Just coming on to the last question and probably statement, really. Obviously, you know, as Sai devotees, we have Swami's grace that overlies everything that we do and live by. But as healthcare professionals, I mean, how much faith and trust do you have in the developers and companies that create this vaccine? How important is it to look at the developers and the companies' track record of integrity, honesty, and reliability, really, in things they produce? How important is this to you as people on the front line delivering the vaccine?
it's always very, very important that they do have that level of integrity. But we also can't forget that these companies also make all the other drugs that everybody is on. So the same level of scrutiny, the same level of integrity and everything, comes into consideration then as well. So, do I trust it? I trust the evidence. That's what I say. I trust the evidence. I know people who work for the pharma companies, and it is hard work that they are doing to make sure that everybody is safe. I mean, their primary aim is to make sure that there is something to protect the world, and for that, we're grateful for that. But like you said, the integrity is very important. And there have been situations in the past, but the difference now is that people do get held accountable. And I think that's the difference here in the medical field. We continually learn, we continually grow.
I mean, I think there's, if I give a different angle on it, and if I say that, in terms of a real world answer, I will say academically, the academic organizations will rip each other apart when it comes to looking at these. I mean, it's completely ruthless. I think then, when Oxford University is saying, this is what we've produced, this is what we've researched, and this is what we're laying on the table, it really does go down with academic weight. And the world does sort of sit up and look at what, and really heavily scrutinize, because I think that any academic organization would love to be able to find a hole, in what Oxford has produced, and to be able to, punch a hole in it would be, something that they could chalk up for themselves. But the point is that scrutiny is absolutely, brutal when it comes to the academic world. The other thing that I would say is that, to be really frank and honest, these are commercial organizations. And I think that, if you have a product which is causing, significant harm or damage, then it's just not going to sell. They won't be able to, they won't be financially viable. And so I think it is, we do need to look at it, in terms of a real world answer as well. They're there to make a profit at the end of the day, and I think that they just simply wouldn't be able to do it, if they were, creating products that were causing harm, rather than good. So I'll give a slightly different sort of angle on the question there, a different answer on the question.
I think to support your statement, I think the one thing I have to say is, the percentage of these people who are coming in with serious adverse events into hospital on the front line is negligible. So I think what is being delivered by yourselves on the front line in terms of administration wise, when we look at the adverse events of requiring hospital admission, it's minimal. So I think it adds to the reliability of what's being advocated by one and all in terms of vaccine and background of where they've come from. So it's just another thing to reassure everyone on the safety of this vaccine. So this, I think, sums up all the questions that have been put together, and the viewers have requested that need answering. So thank you very much to Dr. Shravanan and Nurali for taking your time to answer these very pertinent and important questions. I'm now going to hand back to Dr. Shravanan to take the session on forward.
Thank you. I wanted to introduce a video clip that was coming up next. I'm profoundly grateful to my elder brother, Dr. Jayashankar Janardhan, who is a consultant intensivist based at St. George's Hospital in London. In between an array of ITU and critical care shifts, he was able to find some valued time and effort to be able to give us a few of his thoughts from his unique position and perspective on the front line hospital in London.
Hi, I'm Jayashankar Janardhan. I'm a intensive care consultant at St. George's Hospital, London, UK. This last year has seen intensive care and critical care staff working in quite unprecedented circumstances. This nasty pathology that we have all as a world and as a nation had to respond to has tested the resilience, the very core of everything that is wonderful and brilliant in humanity. Intensive care is built on the entire specialty is built on the strength, currency, resilience, and the extraordinary skills and kindness of every intensive care practitioner, but especially our critical care nursing cadre. Whilst there have been a number of wonderful, heartwarming, extraordinary stories, and whilst there is a glimmer and glimpse of hope coming and emerging out of the second wave through the vaccination campaign, it is absolutely important that when we have the opportunity to have that vaccine, that every single person who's in a position to do so takes up that vaccine in a timely manner. This is not just a protection for each and every one of us, but also offers some important respite for the healthcare professionals across the National Health Service, as well as all of the support staff infrastructure that has had to stand up and work at full tilt for the best part of a year.
जय 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 गणपति देवा,
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 जय 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 गजानना हे गणपति देवा गजानना हे गणपति देवा जय 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 गणपति देवा गजानना 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 हे गणपति देवा 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 जय 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 गणपति देवा प्रेमामृत बरसाओ बाबा प्रेमामृत बरसाओ बाबा प्रेमामृत बरसाओ बाबा प्रेमामृत बरसाओ बाबा दया करो भगवान दया करो भगवान कृपा करो भगवान कृपा करो भगवान प्रेमामृत बरसाओ बाबा प्रेमामृत बरसाओ बाबा तुम्हारी दया बिन कैसा जीवन 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 रोम रोम में बसने वाले राम 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 जन्म मरण से पार उतारो 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 दया करो भगवान कृपा करो भगवान दया करो भगवान कृपा करो भगवान दया करो भगवान कृपा करो भगवान प्रेमामृत बरसाओ बाबा
प्रेमामृत बरसाओ बाबा
दया करो भगवान कृपा करो भगवान
दया करो भगवान कृपा
तुम्हारी दया बिन कैसा जीवन
तुम्हारी दया बिन कैसा जीवन
रोम रोम में बसने वाले राम
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 जन्म मरण से पार उतारो
जन्म मरण से पार उतारो
दया करो भगवान कृपा करो भगवान
दया करो भगवान कृपा करो भगवान
दया करो भगवान कृपा करो भगवान
दया करो भगवान प्रेमामृत बरसाओ
हर 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 सांब शिवा हर 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 सांब शिवा हर 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 सांब शिवा हर 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 सांब शिवा विभूति सुंदर साई शिवा विभूति सुंदर साई शिवा गंगाधर हर गौरी शिवा गंगाधर हर गौरी शिवा त्रिशूलधारी त्रिनेत्र शिवा त्रिशूलधारी त्रिनेत्र शिवा पतिपुरी परमेश शिवा पतिपुरी परमेश शिवा विभूति सुंदर साई शिवा विभूति सुंदर साई शिवा हर 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 सांब शिवा विभूति सुंदर साई शिवा गंगाधर हर गौरी शिवा त्रिशूलधारी त्रिनेत्र शिवा पतिपुरी परमेश शिवा विभूति सुंदर साई शिवा विभूति सुंदर साई शिवा हर 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 सांब
अरविन्दनेत्रम् आत्माभिरामं मनसा स्मरामि आत्माभिरामं मनसा स्मरामि आत्माभिरामं मनसा स्मरामि आत्माभिरामं मनसा स्मरामि प्रभु साई रामं 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 मनसा स्मरामि भूलोक वैकुण्ठ वर्ति निवासं भूलोक वैकुण्ठ वर्ति निवासं भूलोक वैकुण्ठ वर्ति निवासं भूलोक वैकुण्ठ वर्ति निवासं प्रभु साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि 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 साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि आजानुबाहुं अरविन्दनेत्रम् आजानुबाहुं अरविन्दनेत्रम् आत्माभिरामं मनसा स्मरामि आत्माभिरामं मनसा स्मरामि प्रभु साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि प्रभु साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि भूलोक वैकुण्ठ वर्ति निवासं भूलोक वैकुण्ठ वर्ति निवासं प्रभु साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि प्रभु साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि प्रभु साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि प्रभु साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि साई रामं मनसा स्मरामि आजानुबाहुं अरविन्दनेत्रम् कलावती कालिकपालिनी कलावती कालिकपालिनी कलावती कालिकपालिनी कलावती कालिकपालिनी देवी सरस्वती वेदनारायणी देवी सरस्वती वेदनारायणी
भजो मधुर हरिनाम निरंतर भजो मधुर हरिनाम भजो मधुर हरिनाम निरंतर भजो मधुर हरिनाम भजो मधुर हरिनाम निरंतर भजो मधुर हरिनाम Bye. मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी यादवा माधव रंगा विठल मुरारी यादवा माधव रंगा विठल मुरारी मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी घनश्याम सुन्दरा हे गिरिधारी घनश्याम सुन्दरा हे गिरिधारी घनश्याम सुन्दरा हे गिरिधारी घनश्याम सुन्दरा हे गिरिधारी यादवा माधव रंगा विठल मुरारी यादवा माधव रंगा विठल मुरारी मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी यादवा माधव रंगा विठल मुरारी मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी मनमोहना कृष्ण कुञ्ज विहारी घनश्याम सुन्दरा हे गिरिधारी घनश्याम सुन्दरा हे गिरिधारी हे गिरिधारी हे गिरिधारी हे गिरिधारी हे गिरिधारी घनश्याम सुन्दरा हे गिरिधारी घनश्याम सुन्दरा हे गिरिधारी यादवा माधव रंगा विठल मुरारी यादवा माधव रंगा विठल मुरारी विठल मुरारी 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 रंगा विठल मुरारी यादवा माधव रंगा विठल मुरारी साईनाथ दीनानाथ ब्रह्म रूप सद्गुरु 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 निराकार हे आकार सत्य साई 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 सद्गुरु ओंकार सद्गुरु निर्विकार सद्गुरु ओंकार सद्गुरु निर्विकार सद्गुरु ओंकार सकल तुम ही सद्गुरु, सकल तुम ही सद्गुरु, सकल तुम ही सद्गुरु, सकल तुम ही सद्गुरु। साईनाथ दीनानाथ ब्रह्म रूप सद्गुरु, साईनाथ दीनानाथ ब्रह्म रूप सद्गुरु। निराकार हे आकार सत्य साई सद्गुरु, निराकार हे आकार सत्य साई सद्गुरु। ओंकार सद्गुरु निर्विकार सद्गुरु, ओंकार सद्गुरु निर्विकार सद्गुरु, निर्विकार सद्गुरु ओंकार सद्गुरु, निर्विकार सद्गुरु ओंकार सद्गुरु। साईनाथ दीनानाथ ब्रह्म रूप सद्गुरु, साईनाथ दीनानाथ ब्रह्म रूप सद्गुरु। माता पिता सद्गुरु सकल तुम ही सद्गुरु, माता पिता सद्गुरु सकल तुम ही सद्गुरु, 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 सकल तुम ही सद्गुरु। साईनाथ दीनानाथ ब्रह्म रूप सद्गुरु। राम 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 परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, राम 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 परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, राम 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 परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, राम 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 परम सुमंगल राम राम राम। जननी जानकी जीवन राम, जननी जानकी जीवन राम, जननी जानकी जीवन राम, जननी जानकी जीवन राम। जय जय राम साई राम, जय तु रामा, जय जय राम साई राम, जय तु रामा, जय जय राम साई राम, जय तु रामा, जय जय राम साई राम, जय तु रामा। परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, जय परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, जय परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, राम 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 परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, राम राम परम सुमंगल राम राम। जननी जानकी जीवन राम, जननी जानकी जीवन राम, जय जय राम साई राम, जय तु रामा, जय जय राम साई राम, जय तु रामा। परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, परम सुमंगल राम राम, जय परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, जय परम सुमंगल राम राम राम, परम सुमंगल राम राम राम। ओम जय जगदीश हरे, स्वामी सत्य साई हरे, भक्त जना भक्त जना वंदे महेश्वर। ओम जय जगदीश हरे, सच्चिदानंद
जय सद्गुरुदेवा शांति 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 समस्त लोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्त लोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्त लोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु।